drive, you're coming with me. Who's your daddy and what does he do? What? Oh, hi! I'm Chris, and welcome to Scanlines. Join me today while we uncover the history of Robocop games. Enjoy! Robocop exploded onto the big screen in the summer of 1987 in a hail of gunfire and splattered human organs. Paul Verhoeven's ultra-violent American Jesus allegory, cyberpunk satire, was a surprise hit. The low-budget sci-fi action thriller opened at number 1 in the box office in the US, beating rival films including Full Metal Jacket and Superman 4. Robo was a hit and instant franchise material, spawning 2 sequels, lines of toys, comics, a children's cartoon, TV series, a remake, and of course, video games. It all began with British, Manchester-based game developer Ocean Software. Ocean had a history of producing hit film licensed games such as Rambo First Blood Part 2, Cobra, Highlander, which is unfucking playable, and Platoon. And while reading through scripts of currently in production feature films, Ocean's former software development director, Gary Bracey, came across the script for Robocop, a low-budget action thriller about a police officer resurrected as a cyborg, out for revenge against the gang that murdered him whilst battling to regain his humanity. A film that wasn't on anybody's radar. Bracey knew that the material would translate perfectly into the world of video games. With Bracey's recommendation, Ocean acquired the license for a paltry $20,000. Soon, Ocean were sent production stills and VHS tapes containing scenes from the film to help them capture the look and feel of the movie. Ocean immediately sub-licensed the rights to Japanese coin-op giant Data East, who they had a great working relationship with, having ported some of their titles from arcades to home computers. Data East Robocop debuted in arcades around the world in 1988, running on the same hardware as one of the company's previous titles, Dragon Ninja. I'm bad! Let's get into the game.
Serve the public trust, protect the innocent, uphold the law. Robocop.
Upon pumping your coins into the game's very greedy slot, you're treated to a quick introduction loosely explaining the movie's plot and Robo's mission. Then you're straight onto the mean streets of Detroit. There's old Boulder Shoulders now. Right away we can see that Robo is a great representation of his movie self. He's well detailed, animated and shiny. He trucks along, initially pummeling his opponents into quivering mounds of flesh with his iron fists, before, in an awe-inspiring arcade moment, drawing his famous Auto 9 from his leg holster and blasting his enemies to pieces with burst fire goodness. The sounds, like the visuals, are superb for the time, with all the firing and digitised speech samples accompanied by a great rendition of the movie's signature soundtrack. The enemy sprites resemble the movie's villains to a degree, and they are a force to be reckoned with, as they charge onto screen throwing grenades, firing from windows, and trying to run Robo over on motorcycles. Robo's Auto 9 can be powered up by picking up a freeway spread shot, allowing you to take out enemies on the ground and from windows simultaneously. Also available are health pickups in the form of jars of baby food. The first and recurring boss is a well-animated and audio-sampled Ed 209, who constantly rushes Robo whilst firing his 2 Gatling gun arms at him. Ed is a bit of a pushover. All you have to do is jump shoot him in the head relentlessly until he squeals and retreats. But don't let Big Soft Ed fool you. This game is harder than Popeye in a spinach factory. As the screen fills with enemy projectiles, loonies with chainsaws, beefy scumbags holding hostages who all sap away at your health, so you're going to want to hit those dip switches, change it to free play. The second boss is just a van full of chumps, all eager to leap out and get disintegrated. Then you hit the bonus stage, where Robo must shoot as many targets as accurately as possible to help get a top score and regain some health. Now it's the junkyard stage, where things really step up a notch. Enemies are now joined by several environmental hazards, such as wrecking balls and falling junk, as well as Cobra cannon carrying bad guys. Taking one out allows you to pick up a cannon for yourself, a weapon that deals massive damage to rows of enemies and bosses. The boss for this stage is a couple of cranes and the grenade throwing scumbags riding them. It's another easy boss. The spread shot particularly makes it easy to shoot the grenades before they hit you and take out the baddies fast. Have you bastards got a license for that? Get off! You then arrest Clarence. I got you. Damn, Robo, he straight walked up and surrendered. Chill out, big guy. The next stage is the narcotic warehouse, which introduces Ed 209's greatest enemy, stairs, which thankfully Robo can traverse with considerable ease as you fight your way up and around the level. occasionally getting trapped in a compactor trap, requiring some button mashing to free yourself, and yet another easy boss fight against a wrecking machine. Now shit really gets intense, outside the OCP headquarters, including typical floor trap rising spikes at sentry guns, not to mention sudden massive enemy ambushes. Give us your quarters, boy! For the boss, Eddie's back, with a new coat of paint, possibly hoping with his new camouflage he can sneak up on Robo and snap his neck with his huge arms. No such luck, the lumbering robotic dinosaur stomps onto the screen and is easily taken out with the exact same tactics as before.
Thank you for your cooperation.
We're into the Omni Consumer Products building now, and security is a nightmare. There's guards, sentries, and laser walls everywhere. Just getting to the office in the morning in this place has probably resulted in more resignations than the company's notorious new equipment testing policies.
Please put down your weapon. You have 20 seconds to comply.
I think you'd better do what he says, Mr. Kenny.
You now have 15 seconds to comply.
The boss for this stage is not one, but two Ed-209s. It must get lonely being a dysfunctional homicidal metal chicken that's hell-bent on turning all living things into a shivering puddle of red goo. It's the last stage, and it's up to Robo to race to the top of the building and rescue President, also known as the Old Man, from nasty Dick Jones. Getting to the top is pure torture, as many varied elements of death assail the screen. Then we get another Ed-209 encounter, this time with a missile launcher grafted to his side, before the final showdown with Dick.
Serve the public trust,
Robo
protect
loves to
the
shoot Dick.
innocent. Thank you for your cooperation.
Shooting off Dick, President congratulates you on your fine shooting, and we get the windscreen as Robo drives home, looking forward to a nice warm bowl of baby food and a nap in his solid metal recliner. Robocop isn't a great game by today's standards. In fact, it can be quite grueling and frustrating, but it's a shining example of early film licensed arcade titles, capturing the look, feel and sound of a film like had never been seen before. It's still pretty decent and has that just one more go appeal. Robocop would see several home computer and console incarnations over the next few years. The 16-bit versions of the game were based on the arcade game and ported to the Commodore Amiga, Atari ST and DOS, this time coded in-house by Ocean themselves. Whilst based on the arcade version, the developers didn't have any of Data East's files to work from, with Amiga coder Peter Johnson stating that the game's art was drawn over the monochromatic ZX Spectrum graphics in the style of the Data East version, using a lone suitcase version of the arcade as a reference. The Amiga and ST versions boast a new introduction in the style of a Media Break TV news segment with KC1, which is a nice but underused touch, but unfortunately that's where the good ends, as the 16-bit ports of the game are a chore to play, extremely slow, unsuitable controls as the Amiga and Atari versions only support one fire button, meaning to jump, you have to push down then up, or worse, reach out and press the space bar, making those critical Ed-209 headshots extra tedious. The game features some sampled speech, but is not from the arcade. It was recorded by Peter Johnson himself through a Yamaha SPX90 effects processor. It sounds a little off.
Serve the public trust. Protect the innocent. Uphold the law.
And it's bizarre that Robocop feels the need to shout out his own name every time he picks something up. It's like he's a bit special. The feature music is so-so for the capabilities of the system, but recreates the movie theme adequately. Sound effects are also okay. The game features the shooting gallery minigame from the arcade and upgraded versions of first-person hostage rescues and photo fit segments from the Spectrum version. The DOS version has a notable lack of colours due to the hardware limitations of the time. Grating music, minimal sound effects, again very slow with clunky controls. There is, however, an amusing moment during the recreation of the arcade's opening, where we see a horrifically crude, almost childlike drawing of Murphy being murdered. Ocean, however, struck gold with their prime ZX Spectrum version of the game, which became the best-selling game on that platform and spent number 1 in the ZX Spectrum game sales chart for a year and a half.
I'd buy that for $1.
Upon loading the ZX release, we get a loading screen that's a faithful recreation of the movie poster. Then our ears are treated to a nice bit of 8-bit digitised speech, and the famous and oddly tranquil main theme by Jonathan Dunn. A theme ported to all the versions of the game, with the Game Boy version of the theme prominently featured on TV adverts for appliances by manufacturer Ariston.
And on, and on, and on, and Ariston.
The game loosely follows the same format as the arcade, as a side-scrolling shooter with enemies on the ground and above hiding in windows. It's a little slow, but it shouldn't come as a surprise for the system. However, the action is non-stop, and learning the enemy patterns is a must. Again, Robo can collect jars of baby food to replenish his health, and can collect more powerful upgrades for his trusty Auto 9 pistol, such as the trusty three-way spread shot, a large caliber shot for taking out rows of enemies, and the Cobra cannon. Careful now, as even the stock Auto 9 has a limited amount of ammo, so you have to make sure all shots count. It can be a bitch when you're out of ammo and have to chase down an enemy to punch him to death in order to finish a level. The sprites are big and well detailed for the Spectrum. The sound effects are pretty standard, but if you're playing a ZX with a 128KB of memory, like a Plus 2, you get great in-game music as well as some extra digitised speech. This version features some nice mini-games, such as a recreation of the rescuing of the female mugging victim scene from the film, including Robo's targeting system as the crosshair as a nice touch, and a photo fit game where you have to cycle facial features to match the mugshot from the police database. Big Ed puts in a couple of appearances too, but he's unfortunately stationary and just fires a steady stream of straightforward bullets at you. Taking out Jones at the end of the game is presented in the first person as well, which is a nice touch. The biggest problem with this version of Robocop is the learning curve. Learning enemy patterns is essential, and as soon as an enemy hits you, the Robo freezes up in pain, allowing additional damage to come pouring in with no way to defend yourself, which can be very frustrating as one wrong move could cost one of your lives, then it's back to the start of the stage. This version was also ported to the Commodore 64, Amstrad CPC, Game Boy and DOS. The Amstrad port is largely the same, has much more colour, but the sprite is less detailed, and you can only have music or sound effects and not both. And the DOS version is a fucking eyesore. The Commodore 64 version gets a cool loading screen of music. Reaching the main menu gives us an even better rendition of Dunn's main theme. However, in game you can only select music or sound effects, like the CPC version. Getting into the game, the first things you'll notice are the controls are much looser than the other versions. There's also obtained a jump move, which makes firing upwards awkward, and now has a health bar and a drastically reduced timer. This time you only get one life, which is a real bummer because the game is hard as hell. In fact, it's so ridiculously hard, if you're lucky enough to reach stage 7, you're presented with a screen full of garbled mess. The level is severely bugged in its retail release, leading some to believe the increase in difficulty was to prevent players reaching that far into the game. Just like Noah in Wayne's World.
Beauty part is you can't get to the next level, so the kids keep coughing up quarters, you know?
In short, the Commodore 64 version looks and sounds great, but plays like arse. The Game Boy port plays like an hybrid of the home computer version and the arcade, following the Spectrum version's format with some differing level designs, and contains the first-person shooter and matching minigames from the home computers, and the shooting gallery from the arcade. The fight with Ed 209 in Jones's office is also a bit more animated. The controls on this port are a little sluggish, the graphics well detailed, okay sound, featuring Dunn's great music throughout. There is also a 2001 Game Boy Color game, but it isn't based on any other versions. In a very strange decision, this game is a top-down adventure game. You start in the OCP office, where you can check your current mission details and talk to Officer Ann Lewis. This is probably the only time Lewis is prominently featured in a Robocop game, other than a still image, which is a shame because it's crap. You wander around a large area looking for items, getting lost and avoiding shooting civilians who constantly throw themselves in front of your fire as if they want to die. And who am I to deny them a swift death? It's quicker and cheaper than a one-way plane ticket to Sweden. It's a very boring, yawning-juicing slog of a game. So boring I didn't play past the first mission. Sorry Lewis, you deserve better than this.
Lewis, come here when you finish fucking around with your suspect.
On your feet.
Now the last of the games based on the first movie, Robocop for the Nintendo Entertainment System from the original arcade developer Data East. This is a completely different game. Here Robo just doesn't look quite right. He's entirely blue and seems to have spindly legs, and looks kinda like his Endocop variant from the Robocop vs Terminator crossover comic. Robocop now has an expanded HUD system, which displays his power/health meter, a time meter, the currently selected weapon, and various system functions that flash when active. These displays are largely useless, as you'll be focusing your attention on what's happening on the screen, rather than checking which functions are active. You progress along, mercilessly punching tiny people and dogs to death, until it occurs to Robo that he has a gun, which he sometimes forgets about at the strangest times, leaving you to fist fight the hordes for no apparent reason. The enemies can be tricky to hit, especially the dogs, and Robo's controls are too sluggish to suddenly adapt to changing foes on screen. Eventually you'll encounter a big beefcake dude whose flesh seems impervious to your bullets.
No knife can penetrate my skintanium armor. Help! Help!
So you resolve to smash his face in instead. This happens quite frequently, leaving you toe-to-toe in a frustrating button mash contest. You encounter hostage situations where you must shoot the assailant when the hostage ducks. Also present is the shooting gallery minigame. Big Ed also puts in another appearance. He's big and well detailed, but his animation is a bit ropey due to the limits of the NES, with his giant sprite flickering when he moves. When you complete a level, you get a cool scene of Robocop beatboxing. And the game has some decent cutscenes to push the story along. There are various power-ups that can be collected, such as a submachine gun and the fabled Cobra cannon, which comes in handy against bosses. You progress through the junkyard and OCP offices, just as the other games before, coming to the aid of the OCP president once again held captive by Jones. Only this time, Robo appears to have got the shakes. Perhaps all the endless violence has finally gotten to him, and he can't bring himself to pull the trigger. No, never mind, he got past that shit. Ultimately, Robocop in the NES has some decent graphics, okay sound and music, but it's quite boring and frustrating to play, with constant enemy assaults, poor hit detection, stiff controls, and Robo's insane insistence of putting his gun away. It's not terrible, but I felt let down by this version. A more basic version of the game was also released on the TRS-80 Coco.
Thank you for your cooperation.
That's all the original Robocop games. Like the movie, the games were a massive success, and allegedly being the first home computer game to sell 1 million copies. And the movie spawned 2 sequels and a crossover comic, so you bet they got video game adaptations as well. So let's take a quicker look at the sequels. Robocop 2 saw the shiny lawman return to the mean streets of Detroit with a new lick of shiny purple hued paint, to face off against ruthless junkie cult leader Kane, and rid the city of his new designer drug, Nuke. A showdown that would, in a somewhat unwise move on OCP's part, see Kane resurrected as the lethally insane Robocop 2. Robo 2 upped the body count and the robot carnage, featuring some of the last great stop motion effects in cinema, and was prime material for a slew of video game adaptations. Kicking things off is the arcade version, again developed by Data East of Japan. Robocop 2 is styled as a side-scrolling brawler in the same vein as Final Fight, except you're armed with your trusty Auto 9 at all times, which is a strange move for a brawler, as Robo feels extremely overpowered in contrast to his enemies. The graphics are nice, big and detailed, the Japanese origins really showing this game's design. The music is nice and bombastic, suiting the game's style, although it doesn't feature any tracks from the movie, which would have been nice. As well as firing, if Robo gets close to an enemy, he can grab them and slam them into the ground, in an awesome display of his authority, not only of the law, but of the arts. There is some variety to the gameplay. Sometimes Robo will enter a targeting mode while shooting down alleyways. There's some Super Scaler-esque action in some vehicle chase scenes, and some button masher segments. Bosses include a guy in an exosuit who flies around on a jetpack and fires rockets at you, a chainsaw-wielding loony, a blue mutant dude who has an army of zombie-like goons, who either resemble the Melting Emil from Robocop 1, or possibly Tarman from Return of the Living Dead. Other bosses include Big Ed, making another appearance. Let's be right, it's not a Robocop game without Big Ed. Then there's Kane, who is huge and well animated. You can chase through several environments as you fight to the death in the finale. Robocop 2 the arcade isn't held in high regards in arcade ratings, but I had fun with it. It's very easy and very short though, and can be finished in around 20 minutes or so. There's also a 2-player mode, so you and a buddy or significant other can tear through Detroit's gutter life together. More interesting is the later Japanese revision of the game, which adds a short playable prologue depicting the end of the first movie, with Robo busting into the OCP office, tackling an Ed 209 unit before shooting himself some dick. The arcade version was not ported to any systems. Instead, several different versions were produced for the home consoles and computers by Ocean Software, with the Commodore Amiga and Atari ST versions handled by Special FX. The Commodore Amiga version features decent graphics, decent yet sparse music, and excellent sound effects and speech samples. Programming of the Amiga version began months before the film's release. As a reference, the Special FX development team were given a pre-release version of the film that omitted several scenes. The team was also given a preliminary script of the film and pictures of the characters. Audio samples from the film, including Robocop's gunfire and footsteps, were added into the Amiga version. The game has some variety with a few minigames such as a brain teaser, where the player must clear Robo's memory PCB board of red chips to regain his memory, and a bonus life. And as always, an awkward gallery shooter mode. The game has an attractive HUD showing your life, nuke collected, timer, score, and some nice digitised graphics of Robo's head, with the reflection of the approaching Robocane on it representing your lives. When you lose a life, the visor part is destroyed, displaying poor Murphy's face underneath. As you progress along, you must collect vials of nuke, a recurring theme in most Robocop 2 games, and rescue hostages. The game is very short, with only 2 levels and 1 real boss fight in the form of Robocane. The only thing that draws out the playtime is some very awkward platforming in the first stage that will either see you plummeting either to your doom or back to the bottom of the level, which causes lots of frustration and timer panic. Once you reach the end of stage 2, you can fight a few Ed 209 units, then take on Kane, who you must chase around the location before putting him out of your misery. Ultimately, it's a sometimes fun, sometimes annoying experience, but once you have the platforming down, it can be finished in half an hour. This version was also ported to the Atari ST. The ZX Spectrum version of the game follows a similar formula, retaining the minigames from the Amiga version, decent music and digitised shots from the film that are quite impressive for the machine. However, gameplay is very slow, with clunky controls and awkward platforming making the game a chore to get through. The game was quite well regarded on the system back on its original release, but well, I was just never a fan of this one and much prefer the first Spectrum game. The version released for the Amstrad GX4000 is quite possibly the most frustrating game of the series and possibly one of the worst licensed games I have ever had to suffer. As soon as it starts, Robo is forced into a meat grinder-like gauntlet of beginner's traps, leaps of faith and poor collision detection. The graphics are sound and nice and detailed for the system, but I couldn't stomach more than one level of this atrocity. Next we have the Nintendo Entertainment System version of the game. It's got nice sound and music and big detailed graphics, even if it does look like Robo's had few too many pies, and at some point got trapped in a compactor with his little stumpy legs. The game sees you collecting vials of nuke, rescuing hostages and arresting bad guys, i.e. bumping into certain baddie sprites. The NES version is another exercise in frustration, as if you don't collect enough nuke or arrest enough bad guys by the end of the stage, you cannot proceed to the next stage, instead having to recalibrate yourself in a god-awful gallery shooting mode. Failing the shooting gallery and it's back to the start of the previous mission. The crosshair glides all over the screen at insane speeds. Robo himself seems to have been a victim of a prank in the lab because he handles like he's coated in KY jelly, sliding all over the place, making for some very poor platforming before you get used to how he handles. Memorising the placement of the nuke vials is a must, as is taking the correct path which will allow you to collect the most nuke. Take a wrong path and there's a vial below you? Tough. The screen does not scroll back. In short, the NES version isn't much fun. This version was also ported to the Commodore 64. Lastly, we have the Game Boy version by Painting by Numbers, seeing Robo platform his way around levels, avoiding obstacles and rescuing hostages. Gone are the vials of nuke narcotics, probably at Nintendo's request considering the platform's young audience. The graphics are big and bold for a tiny system with decent sound. The game has a few nice one-on-one boss battles and a few rounds of a sliding tile puzzle to recover Robo's memories. Robo can get some extra power-ups like the freeway shot and even a jetpack. Played on the Game Boy Color, the game has a few extra colours to give the graphics a bit more depth. I quite enjoyed this version, although it isn't very long. So, Robocop 3. There was a film called Robocop 3, but I don't want to talk about it. A film that once completed sat on the distributor's shelf for 2 years before even seeing a theatrical release. I'd rather ignore its existence completely, if not for the games based on it. Surely they can't be as bad as the movie, right? Right? Well, there is no real arcade version of Robocop 3, so let's get straight to the home computer and console ports. The ZX Spectrum port starts as a pretty poor first-person shooter in the vein of Operation Wolf, but soon moves on to a more traditional side-scrolling shooter of the original ZX game. The game pushes the limits of the system quite well. The graphics and sound effects are decent. Despite a good title theme, the gameplay music is rather grating. There's the usual power-ups, and using the jetpack was quite fun. This is another title that was well regarded on the ZX and released at the end of the system's life. Released in 1992, a year before the film even finally saw its theatrical release. Robocop 3 was also released on the Super Nintendo. This version has okay graphics and sound, but feels rather lifeless with dull backgrounds and gameplay that hasn't evolved from any of the earlier titles. The controls are a bit stiff, and there's an odd design choice where rather than pressing up and fire to fire upwards, you have to press a dedicated button, almost as if the developers realised they hadn't enough actions to fill out the SNES's 6 buttons, which makes for some awkward moments. The enemies are very generic and dull. Remember Robo struggling with his crippling fear of rats? There's some cool pickups such as a faithful freeway shot and laser arm and flamethrower attachments. There's poor platforming, a maze-like level to test your timer panic, and the one extra minigame. A minigame so fiendish it brings the game to its knees with its crushing difficulty, the jetpack flying minigame, where shit constantly assails you, take too many hits and crash. Hang back and take too long while dodging and you run out of fuel and crash. It's essential to collect fuel packs to keep going, but these can often appear off screen as you can scroll to either the left or right, so you have to remember where they are. Also, the enemies are massive and obscure the screen, sometimes resulting in the fuel being destroyed whilst firing at enemies. Robocop 3 is hard and not much fun to play. This version was closely ported to the Mega Drive with a few cosmetic and level design differences. And that version was further ported to Sega's Master System and Game Gear. The NES version of Robo 3 is thankfully a different story. Appearing late in the system's life, yeah, it's a side-scrolling shooter, and a pretty simple one, but the controls are fine and the difficulty reasonable. You could just truck along taking out bad guys from multi-tier levels while collecting power points. At the end of each round you can spend the power points to repair Robo's armour and regain some health. The boss robot ninja battles are possibly the hardest facet of the game. The graphics and sound are all fine for the system. It's short, it's nothing special, but it's playable and fun for a short while. Lastly, the cream of the Robo Crop. Robocop 3 for the Commodore Amiga, or as it's known in North America, Robocop 3D. This version is presented in multiple game styles that can either be played sequentially by selecting the movie adventure mode and playing through the story, or 5 scenarios that can be selected from the arcade action mode. The game features a gritty aesthetic, more akin to the first movie than the film it is based on. Gameplay is presented in cutting edge at the time, 3D polygon, first person perspectives, and sees you either chasing baddies down in your car, exploring old Detroit and taking out baddies and rescuing hostages in the first person shooter mode, flying with a jetpack whilst blowing up targets below, and facing off with deadly robot ninjas in one-on-one combat. Obviously the graphics have dated terribly, but this was a fun evolution of the franchise at the time, pushing the Amiga hardware to its limit. Look, there's our first look at a fully 3D Robocop now. The music is nice and moody and in line with the movies. And the cutscenes, particularly the media break segments, are well done. Perhaps the biggest struggle replaying this title today is the controls, as all modes are primarily played with the Amiga's mouse. Steering the car and aiming is quite sensitive, and you can only move forwards on foot by holding the right mouse button, using the left to fire. The The game was also released for the Atari ST, pushing that system also to its limits, and a version for the PC on DOS with better graphics, but the audio is terrible compared to the Amiga. The game didn't have an easy production. The Amiga version was developed by Digital Image Design, which began work on the game in September 1990. Orion Pictures initially kept most of the film's story details secretive, so the DID development team had to proceed using guesswork. The team had only film stills as a visual reference during development. Many of the Amiga's game ideas originated as sketches and storyboards. The Amiga version was developed using a significantly modified version of the 3D game engine previously used by DID to develop F-29 Retaliator. To prevent piracy, early copies of the game came issued with an electronic dongle that had to be inserted into a controller port in order to play the game. Robocop 3 on the Amiga is ambitious work, and fans should definitely check this one out. And that's all the main series of Robocop covered. Now we can move on to the most exciting crossover of the 1990s, Robocop vs the Terminator, based on Frank Miller's wildly successful Dark Horse comic. It's the ammo-pumping, bodily fluid splashing grudge match for the ages. There are 3 main versions of Robocop vs the Terminator. Let's start with the Super Nintendo version from Interplay. The SNES version starts with a nice intro, using recreations of the panels from the comic to tell the story. A lone female soldier, Flo, has come back through time to take out Robocop. As it turns out, his mind being plugged into Skynet kickstarts the creation of the Terminators. The start menu is pretty ugly, and the music is generic. Robo initially starts on the streets of Detroit once again. The graphics are big and very detailed, although once again on the Nintendo, Robo looks a little off. What's with his feet? Is he standing on his tippy toes, hoping to sneak up on unsuspected villainy and whisper to them their rights? Can't imagine a 1-ton walking machine to be very stealthy. No, well, or does he have cloven feet? Robocop, part man, part machine, part devil goat. All abomination. Robo can now hold 2 weapons at a time and cycle through them. Upgrades to his Auto 9 include a missile seeker, plasma cannon, and even Ed 209's arm. You battle through old Detroit before coming face to face with a Terminator, where you blast the flesh of his Arnie-esque appearance and fight the endoskeleton underneath. The T-800s are tough in this game and take a lot of hits. Robo then proceeds to the OCP headquarters where he falls into a trap. Hijacked by Skynet, he awakens in the future and sets out into the post-apocalyptia to stop the Terminator menace. From here on, the difficulty ramps up, with some treacherous platforming sections and constantly being swarmed by Terminators that take many hits, even when you pick up the more powerful weaponry. The bosses are pretty lame, featuring stock Terminators and a multi-tiered tank hunter killer. And finally, a face made of electricity representing Skynet's core. The Terminators themselves are well drawn and animated, joined by Terminator dogs that suddenly rush you from off screen. Despite some nice character designs and backgrounds, this version is quite dull and a slog to get through, due to the difficulty ramping up later in the game. I think the most unforgivable part is the lack of any sampled speech. The SNES version released to mixed reviews. Then there's the Game Boy version, once again by Interplay. It's a very different game. It's quite cute, to be honest. Oh, look at little mini Robo on patrol. He's so precious. It's a very slow game. The controls, not very responsive. The Terminators don't look very Terminator-y. There's some awkward platforming once again. There's no bosses except a final boss, which is just a big brain. Or maybe it's Krang, and Skynet was based inside the Technodrome all along. It's pretty easy, and you can probably get through the entire game with 1 life in 20 minutes. A version of Robocop vs the Terminator was in production for the Nintendo Entertainment System. However, it was never released because it sucks Robo Goatman Cop balls. Now lastly, the Sega Mega Drive or Sega Genesis version, developed by Virgin Games USA. Yeah, that's more like it. Robocop vs the Terminator on the Sega 16-bit machine is a mean, violent, bombastic beast. Unfortunately, the Sega version loses the cool comic panel cutscenes, and all we get is a starting text which explains the plot. Too much of the plot actually, because it tells you about things you haven't even done yet in the game, which seems a bit lazy. Starting once again on the streets of old Detroit, Robocop sports what is probably his best 16-bit console representation, well animated and detailed, with some cool idle animations. Before we even begin, we're going to enter two important codes. The first code, pause the game, and CCAABBCCAABB, and we'll be warped to a secret room, where we'll get 54 extra lives and a message from the game's programmer, John Botti. Cheers John, you're a legend. Now this game is gory, like really gory, but amazingly it's still toned down for release. But don't worry, because we'll soon sort that out. Pause the game and punch in CBABBABBCBBCBBCACCAABBBACA to hear a siren and activate Real Game Mode, which reintroduces female baddies, some more gore, an alternate more painful death for Robo where he humps the floor in an agonising electrical convulsion, and an alternate game over screen. The enemies are all level drawn. Is that Cammy? The levels well designed with decent art. Robo can light the SNES on two weapons which can be cycled. These include Trusty Auto 9, Spread Shot, Plasma Cannon, Ed 209's arm, a laser, and an insane grenade launcher where you fire a multitude of life obliterating grenades, then casually guide them around the screen, disintegrating your enemies into a flurry of red paste. Robo once again regains health from baby food jars and also from rescuing hostages. There are several cool bosses, such as an Arnie-styled leather-clad Terminator, Robo Kane making another appearance, Ed 209, gun turret wielding Terminators, a futuristic variant on Ed 209, and finally a giant Terminator head. Guess they ran out of ideas on that last one, but still it's better than an electrical face. These elements come together to make the game something that the SNES version couldn't achieve. It actually feels like a mashup of both movies, in sight and sound, and that's wonderful.
I like it!
Granted, the SNES version leans more towards the comic roots of the story, but the Mega Drive's more visceral approach is a winner. The music in the game is also quite good, with the exception of the opening track, which repeats itself for most of the present day section of the game. A synth number where a breathy male and female constantly utter the word Terminator. You'll almost feel like you're in an alternative lifestyle bar with a leather-clad Arnie lookalike grinding up against you whilst whispering Terminator over and over in your ear.
Take off your clothes.
Also included is a ton of great digitised voice samples and effects. Although, as I said, the game is hard as hell, and God help you if you face a boss with only your Auto 9, which will be shooting them forever. You really need one of the upgrade weapons for most bosses, particularly the final boss, who takes an eternity to put down. The difficulty level seems to almost be threatening to sabotage the enjoyment of the game if not for the other very positive aspects that outweigh the learning curve. Robocop vs. the Terminator on the Mega Drive is a game I always find myself coming back to, and a true gem in the Mega Drive lineup. This version of the game also saw more basic versions ported to the Sega Master System and Game Gear, which despite the downgrade are still quite playable and retain a lot of the level design and digitised speech.
Looking for trouble?
Robocop vs. the Terminator will be the last main game featuring the shiny chrome enforcer of the law for 6 years. In 1999, Titus Software secured the rights to produce Robocop Video Games, and in 2001 released the aforementioned Robocop for the Game Boy Color. A Game Boy Advance title, which was a side-scrolling shooter, was also in production by Titus Software around this time, but aside from some preview screenshots, never surfaced. The final game so far to be released based on the original movies was released by Titus in 2003 on the PlayStation 2, Microsoft Xbox, GameCube and Windows, simply titled Robocop. This time around, Robocop is a full-on first-person shooter, as was all the rage at the time. And still is, unfortunately. Robocop, a cyborg police officer in Neo-Detroit, is tasked with finding the people responsible for the spread of a new designer drug known as Brain Drain. So the plot is a lame rehash of Robocop 2's. The game is utter shit. The graphics are very so-so for the PS2 era, which was well into its life cycle at this point and seeing much better realised games. Robocop's model is okay for his first full-fledged 3D outing, but all the other character models and background textures lack any detail. Robo's controls aren't very tight, with his aim being quite slippery. It's hard to see enemies who most of the time can shoot you through walls. Thankfully, Robo's targeting system highlights the enemies for you. The music is atrocious, with no renditions of Robo's original music at all, or anything sounding vaguely similar. The whole package feels very cheap and lifeless. Some of the few cool moments come mostly from setting off chain reactions of exploding barrels, and indulging Robocop's hatred of rats once again by relentlessly shooting a giant rat in the sewer. The sewer level. You know you've got a product bursting with creativity when one of the first levels is a fucking sewer level. Drab, lifeless areas that suck the excitement out of everything. Robocop also speaks occasionally during your rambles around Neo-Detroit, uttering such classic movie lines as, "Oh, yeah." Yeah, Robocop just said that. Robocop is now the Kool-Aid guy.
Hey, Kool-Aid! Oh, yeah!
And the 500-pound elephant in the room is Robocop himself. He moves slowly and clunkily, just like in the movies. However, this does not translate into a first-person shooter at all. 2003's Robocop released a very negative reviews, and it was clear Titus couldn't really get a proper handle on the franchise. Unfortunately, this could have been what put the final nail into the coffin of Robocop games for years to come. I really couldn't force myself any further than the second level and turned this one off for good. And that's every main Robocop game released to date. We played some great games, some not so great games, and some downright diabolical games. But who knows, with news that the movie Robocop Returns is finally going into production, there still might be a bright future in video game law enforcement. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you again for more Scanlines. Good day.